Poštovani gledatelji, čast mi je u programu N1 televizije ugostiti Gunnara Ekelove Slydala, glavnog tajnika Helsinškog komiteta u Norveškoj. Mr. Slydal, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
We talk a lot, of course, about war in Ukraine, but with the war comes the worst that goes out every war, and these are war crimes, human rights violations, and atrocities. From your longevity in this area, how can we, in the case of Ukraine, fight impunity concerning the war crimes and, human rights violations that we are seeing at the moment while the war and aggression is going on?
There are already a lot of investigation and documentation going on, both by Ukrainian civil society organizations, and there is a quite extensive team under the Prosecutor General of Ukraine. And there are also international efforts like the UN Commission on War Crimes in Ukraine, and last but not least, the International Criminal Court, which has already announced that they are investigating and collecting evidence in Ukraine. And this is all happening because there is a perception that there is a lot of war crimes being committed.
But what can we do after that? We know, the Russia stands towards international law, and we are kind of, in an awkward situation. Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council from one side. From the other side, it has been expelled from the UN Human Rights Council, expelled from Council of Europe. So basically the jurisdiction of European Courts of Human Rights is not there anymore. So, what can we do? And in which framework, of which legal system, if we go, step by step from the persecutors, direct guys who committed rape in Bucha, for example, and then we go up to hierarchy, maybe, to Lavrov and to Putin.
Yes, there are different overlapping jurisdictions in Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine has full jurisdiction over its territory, but Ukraine legislation is not really covering all war crimes. So there is one of the problems. But then you have the International Criminal Court. Neither Russia nor Ukraine is a member of the court, but Ukraine has declared that ICC has jurisdiction over its territory since 2014. So the ICC can and has said it will investigate war crimes in Ukraine. And it has teams on the ground doing that as we speak. Then you have another possibility, other countries, mostly in Europe, which has universal jurisdiction legislation, which also means that they, at least in some cases, can prosecute and issue arrest warrants. And what you say about the command chain is crucial, it's very important, because, of course, the perpetrators, the direct perpetrators, are on the ground in Ukraine or in Russia, firing missiles or shooting on civilian objects or torturing civilians or raping women systematically. We hear all reports about this. And to prosecute up the chain, you have to prove that the commanders know that the soldiers are doing this, are either doing nothing or are even ordering them to do this. And the 1,000 kroner or $1,000 question is how to reach at the top. We think that one way to reach at the top quite fast is to include in the investigation of war crimes the context of aggressive war. It was a decision which could only be taken by the top leadership in Russia to actually go to war against Ukraine, to attack the country. And if you take that as the context of the other crimes, it becomes very clear that the top guys in Kremlin should be part of the overall prosecution of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine. So we think that this should be part of the strategy of the prosecutor of the ICC. And we are leaning on a legal brief which has been describing in some details how this can be done. If we end up with only small fish or mid-level fish, this accountability has not been as it should be, because the biggest responsibility lies in the Kremlin.
You've mentioned the principle of universal jurisdiction. You know, countries of former Yugoslavia have a vast experience of persecuting war crimes and the trials, you know, from local courts to the special court in The Hague that was established. But talking about this, what you just said, you know, if we talk about Russian citizens, if we talk about the experience that we had here with trials in absentia, you know, with basically domestic courts also taking at certain instances, you know, persecuting the war crimes or human rights violations, that can never be the fact or done under Putin's Russia, basically. Can you, you know, imagine that, for example, Russia by itself will persecute a soldier, not to mention this. So, you know, how do you see this conundrum, basically, in international law and in this legal situation, that this aggression, this war is happening? So basically, UN Security Council member doing this for the second time in, you know, 20 years, if we count Georgia also. And
yeah,
you know, first time Ukraine in 2014-15.
I think the first point we have to realize, this is such a crisis for international law and legal order, because Russia, as being one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, they are trusted by the world community to uphold the international law. So the fact that one of these members commit war crimes, but in the framework of aggressive war, it's such a difficult matter to deal with. So some would say you can dream about arrest orders, arrest warrants of people in the Russian leadership or even against soldiers. But the fact that it's such a powerful state behind these crimes, it will make it very hard. So we have to use all the tools we have, issuing the best documentation we can and the best evidence we can, and issuing arrest warrants and try to put as much pressure as possible to have people eventually arrested. We know that having an international arrest warrants against a state leader also has an effect. So I don't think it's either or. We have to go step by step. First step is to have very solid documentation, to have very good legal analysis, and then indictments will come, arrest warrants will come, and we have to trust that this will have an effect. And who knows the future, how long this Kremlin regime will last. And we know that when people are out of power, the story changes dramatically.
We know it, as I've mentioned from our story. There are 3 these big institutes of international law regarding what we discussed. You've mentioned one of them, it's crime of aggression. The second of which we all know very well of is joint criminal enterprise. And, you know, the biggest one of all is genocide. I have to say that, you know, if we remember the casus belli, the speech of Putin when he was the one who mentioned the word genocide, which from my perspective is completely, you know, insane in these circumstances. And we now see, political messages from parliaments around the world, basically supporting Ukraine by voting some declarations of calling the genocide what's going on in Ukraine. But how difficult, from your own personal experience, from what we have seen within, the instruments of international law, is at the end to genocide in any court?
The short answer is very difficult, because you have to prove what was going on in terms of crimes, let's say killings, abductions, etc., etc. But the most difficult element of that crime is often to prove that there was a intent of partial or wholly destructing a group. So we remember from the war in Bosnia, there were many indictments related to genocide, but only those who concerned Srebrenica were concluded by the court as genocide. So I'm cautious about using the word genocide, as it has been done by parliaments, as you say. I see that as more political statements about the seriousness of the crimes taking place. But the legal concept of genocide is much harder to deal with. And it's not like if you don't have a judgment of genocide, it's not serious. Crimes against humanity are super serious. It's a systematic and widespread attack on civilians. War crimes are super serious. So it's not, we should not use genocide easily to try to describe how serious a situation is. What's happening in terms of human rights violations and violations of international law in Ukraine is extremely serious. It's brutality which we really don't want to see in Europe today.
And just for the end, I want to ask you, you've mentioned several times, because this will be in continual story for a long time. You are the veteran of, let's say, human rights. We are at some kind of crossroads, turning points, very difficult and different situation in our history. Do you think that the time that will come after this will strengthen the, law, world-based world order on, law and human rights, or will it weaken it?
Well, I learned from being in this human rights business for a long time, it's very hard to predict. We started in the 1990s to be very optimistic. And then we had the wars in former Yugoslavia and some other places, and we became more realistic. It's hard, this transition from one system to another, and there are a lot of potential for conflicts. I think what we are witnessing now is maybe a wider and broader mobilization for a rules-based international order. People see so clearly the benefits of having states that respect international law. So my hope is that that will be the outcome, that not only European countries, but also countries in other places see that this is the road to a more peaceful future with less human suffering. I think one of the crucial elements in this is that there are less double standards in the way also Western countries react. Now they are super eager to support human rights, war crimes tribunals, trials related to Ukraine, but that has to translate to a principled approach, that there should be justice in all similar situations in similar ways. If we can get to that, I become a little bit more optimistic about the future.
Gunnar Ekelove Slydal, thank you so much for these important insights. Thank you.
Thank you.